Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, we're back for the second half of the top 10 checklist for retirement preparedness for 2023. We went through the first 5 on the prior episode, so hopefully you checked that out. If you didn't, welcome into the podcast. We certainly appreciate you, but go check that one out as well on the prior. We've got, Phil and I have done this for a while now. We've got well over 100 podcasts you can check out. Got them in audio and video form, so feel free to stop by Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and check out the content with Phil and I. Phil, what's going on, buddy? How are you?
Doing good.
Yeah.
Deep into tax season now. So
yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true.
That time of year.
Yeah, second week of February. I guess you are right.
Everyone's got their 1099 supposedly, right? It's the challenge now is when's that corrected one coming out? So
okay. Yeah, so I know you're a busy guy, so we'll get into it this week. We're going to pick up, like I said, on the second half of the prior podcast we did. And we were going through, kind of the 10-point checklist. I don't know why I said top 10. It's just kind of 10, but 10-point checklist. And, and it was income was 1, and which accounts to take from was 2. 3 was when to take Social Security, the ideal time. There is no ideal time, but as your strategy, you can narrow that down with a good strategy. 4 was longevity. 5 was handling market volatility, because we need to still keep up with inflation. We still need to have growth money in retirement. And so that goes to 6, which is inflation. We kind of touched on it a little bit. So let's pick it up there and get into what is your plan to combat inflation. Typically, Phil, in normal times, we tend to forget about inflation. It's easy to do. I've always said it's kind of like calories. We know inflation exists. We know calories exist. Most of the time we ignore them, unless you're really kind of focused on that. But this past year has reminded us very starkly that inflation can suck.
Right.
So
it's a real thing. It
it's
happens,
a real thing. So you've got to have, and I get that people are like, well, I can't, where am I going to make 9-10%? Or use your actual, eyes and your wallet. Some things are up 20, 30, 40%.
Yeah.
You can't get that in a return, but you still do need to have a plan to combat regular inflation and maybe even some of this higher inflation.
Right. And so a lot of points with inflation. I mean, it's again, one of those things that kind of like markets, we get comfortable, the inflation follows interest rates. I mean, that's a slower moving, kind of a longer cycle typically. And I mean, we've been through that. How many years did inflation and interest rates drop, and we kind of bounced around this bottom point for several years, last 5-6 years, picking up a little bit and then dropping back down, and, didn't really know where we were going. Well, all of a sudden now we've picked up interest rates and inflation, both. So it's part of a cycle. It's going to happen. And you can't get tied up in the current inflation, kind of like a market, right? You can't get tied up, the market's down 20%, 30%. Well, that's bad. You plan for it, make sure you've adjusted accordingly. Same thing with inflation. You're not going to keep up with a 9% inflation necessarily this year alone. And it doesn't matter just this year. Look at the long-term picture. On average, you have to plan for inflation in your portfolio with income and asset positioning. So what incomes do you have that are going to be inflation adjusted? If you have a pension,
and most of those don't have COLAs, right?
Right. I mean, you're locked in. I always say when you're looking at a pension, the first year is the best year because it's going to be the same amount, and that's the lowest point in inflation in your lifetime, because it's only going to go up. Not typically big numbers early on, but if you retired this year, you saw a huge increase, so, but your pension stayed the same typically, unless you have a governmental, some nonprofit type pensions. But
well, if we take inflation, Phil, back to number 1, which is our income need, right? The very first one on the checklist was income. So even let's just go with normal inflation numbers, not the crazy stuff we've been experiencing. Let's just go with normal 3% or something like that. If you've identified your income need at $5,000, here in 2023, let's say, and then 10 years from now, 12 years from now, you're still retired, right? So now you're, a decade more. That 5,000 is not the 5,000 you no longer need to survive. That's no longer your income monthly need. That's the point of inflation, right? So over time, it's going to eat. So now you're needing to bring in, let's say it's $7,500 a month to do the same exact thing. Do the accounts and do the plan. Does it account for that? And many people don't think about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting process when we're going through that planning process and walking through that. And we're going to say, oh, here's what you need in year one. We get down to the end of the plan 25, 30 years later, and they're looking at, wow, I've got $1 million left. I'm like, okay, well, let's put that in perspective. Remember that 6,000, 7,000 a month, whatever it was you needed up front. Well,
Right.
look what that is today, in 30 years with inflation,
Yeah.
that's more than double that.
Yeah.
It's surprising. It's eye-opening sometimes when you run the math on it, but you have to build that into the plan. Understand there's going to be inflation.
Yep.
And then how are you going to combat it? Have income that has inflation adjustment. Social Security, that's one of the big benefits of Social Security,
right?
Is it does have cost of living. Again,
they send it
historically,
to Medicare
last 20 years, it's only been 2%, but we've been in a pretty low period of inflation.
Right.
Last 2 years, we've seen the benefits, 5.9, 8.7, right? So we're getting increases in Social Security to help us combat inflation.
And anybody who's on Social Security only will tell you they take a lot of that, for Medicare. So
right. Well, yeah, exactly. Medicare, that's going to be another piece. And that kind of ties into when you're looking at overall inflation. Personally, when we're planning, we use a separate inflation number on medical related expenses because the reality is medical expenses have historically increased quicker.
Yeah.
College, it's the same thing. I mean, if you're still planning for college in your scenario, don't just use traditional inflation. Understand college cost. What have they gone up, over time, and plan for it.
Yeah, for sure. Although you watch any of that stuff lately, you see all these AI things like this Chat GPT and so on and so forth. I was going to start causing a whole lot of problems in the university.
Yeah, it's going to make that's a whole nother discussion we can get into.
Yeah, so. Another 2 to 5 years is going to get really weird.
It is. It is.
Okay, so that was number 6. Let's go to number 7, Phil. Possibility of future tax increases. And really 5, 6, and 7. 5 was market volatility. 6 is combating inflation. 7 is future of tax increases, possibility. We can't control any of those. We have no individual control over any of that.
Nope.
So we have to try to figure out where we can do control. If they do nothing, if nothing is talked about or changed at all, in 26, taxes are going up.
Correct. Period. I mean, that's just legislation, and that's what's out there. It's already been passed back in 2018.
Right.
That's on the books. That to make it different, they have to change it.
Right.
And that's a whole other discussion we can get into whether that's going to happen. But the bigger picture on taxes is understand where we are today, where we've been historically. What's the national debt done? Right. If you start to look at this big picture, taxes are a huge problem. And personally, I think they have no place to go but up. And
I think most of us do. We don't want to always admit it, but yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on that. Maybe we should at some point to kind of walk through some thoughts and concepts around taxes and increasing. And this is reality. We've got to look at it. And it's nothing new, right?
Right.
Top bracket today, 37%. It's going back to 39.6. And you're thinking, oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Worst bracket ever, top bracket, 94%.
Yeah.
So it's not unseen. It's not like we've not been there before.
Yeah. And that's just beyond daunting to think about, right?
Right. I mean, it's kind of like market volatility. No, I don't want to think about that, but you have to plan for it. You have to understand what's the potential.
Well, and that's why Roth conversions have been such a big conversation, such a narrative push for the last 2+ years, is because everyone's like, hey, let me convert at the tax rate now. Let me take this $1 million I've got in my 401k and start converting it over little by little, smartly. Hopefully people are doing in order to maybe pay, 22% tax rate hypothetically now versus maybe 32 in 3 years or 5 years or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a plan and a strategy in place, and smartly is the right way to put it, right? Because I mean, I see too many people get panicked about this and move everything.
Yeah.
Well, now you probably paid too much tax, and you're actually set up to, have underpaid taxes in the future, where you've got a personal exemption, standard deduction.
Yeah.
That there's a certain level of income you can have and never pay taxes anyway. So why would you want to convert everything? Mm-hmm. Have a strategy, run the math, figure out what the right process is. The biggest risk of assets that you have from a tax standpoint is that tax deferred bucket.
Right.
Because we don't know what the tax liabilities are on that bucket. And that's always the challenge. The taxes on that bucket get determined when you pull the money out. So what the rates are at that point in time.
Yeah. And as a CPA and a financial specialist and an advisor, you're looking at both of these things through your design for whatever it is, whatever kind of strategy and plan you're putting together, which I think is a nice extra benefit. Not saying that financial advisors who aren't CPAs don't think about those things, but some don't. Let's just be honest. So
make sure a lot of them don't want to give tax advice. They'll say, talk to your CPA, but I can tell you from experience personally, a traditional CPA, somebody that is all they do is CPA type work. They're not in the financial advising side of it. They have a hard time with the concept of paying taxes early. Why would you ever pay things today that you could pay later?
Yeah.
Well,
they have their focus. The advisor has this focus. And sometimes those two don't necessarily, I mean, granted, they're both going to do their job correctly, but they may not be being as efficient as someone who's been in both trenches, I guess.
Right. And taxes are something that you can't look through the current lens only, right? And that's we all get taught to do that. How do you judge your CPA? How much did I get back on the return this year? Oh, I owed money. You did a bad job, right? Well, not necessarily. You got to look at the big picture, long term.
Yeah.
What's the tax results? Having paid little taxes today might lead to a huge tax burden later on for you personally and for your heirs if money's left over.
Unfortunately, Phil, we don't do a really good job with long term anything.
Yes. We're very, very now, focused, in the moment, instant society. That's just the way it works today.
And it's been moving that way for 40 years, 50 years, right?
Right.
It's so funny sometimes you think about, most of our demographics got to be retirees and pre-retirees, but you think about stuff. Last night I pulled up an old sitcom. I usually will put on some sort of old show to kind of have on in the background and fall asleep to or whatever. And so I looked at my wife and I said, if I said, hey, let's put on an old TV show, let's put on a 40 or a 50-year-old TV show and watch to fall asleep to, what would you think of? And she's like, I don't know. I Love Lucy, Dick Van Dyke.
Yeah.
Right? And I had Night Court on, the original Night Court.
Oh, no. Okay.
I was like, this show started 40 years ago.
That's funny.
In 1983. Right. Okay. And I'm like, so it's the concept of time gets away from us. So
it does. Absolutely.
And we've moved into this such disposable life of society that we have. We have no, we're not looking down the road at all. It's all about, what's immediately in front of me. I mean, even what we've been doing with dealing with pandemic and dealing with all these things, we make all these decisions and then later on go, oh, that maybe wasn't the best idea. It's like, well, let's stop and think this through a little bit. Just now starting to see mainstream media have conversations about maybe mining for all the battery stuff for electric cars. Maybe it's not the best thing after all, right?
Right. I mean, you have to have that long-term focus in mind, especially in retirement.
Yeah.
Right.
We don't do well.
Again, it's just not how we're wired. We're always near focused. It's all about today. You have to absolutely look at that, plan for that. But what's the long-term picture too? And it's a balance.
And that's a perfect segue to the next one on the list, which is healthcare.
Right.
And that's number 8, because most of us don't want to look at it long-term. We know. I just saw an interesting quote. I think it was Andy Rooney, and I don't think I'm going to get it exactly right, but it was like we're all very obsessed with, we all love the idea of retirement, getting older and being in retirement, but no one loves the idea of getting older. Something like that. I'm paraphrasing. Like we have to get older to get there. And what happens with getting older is health issues.
Right. It's just part of it. I mean, our bodies are aging, as we age, you slow down, things happen.
And that longevity in it, if you don't plan for that health care.
Right. That the longevity is definitely a multiplier in this scenario. Plan for what is, how are you covering medical in retirement? And this is my son-in-law Brandon does for our firm Medicare planning for our clients.
Right.
And it's a huge discussion to have up front. Very same concept. You can't look at today. And too many people I see today when we look at Medicare, that concept and what's the cheapest I can get it today. They choose one plan today. Again, not having that longer term focus of, well, what's things going to look like potentially 10, 15 years down the road.
Right.
And if you get to that, maybe you can't change. And we'll have another segment later on Medicare and talk more about that. But having that longer term focus on Medicare, and that's just medical side of it, right? Then the other big picture is long term care. What if I no longer can take care of myself? How are you planning for that? Who's going to help out?
and we don't want to do it. And
Right.
again, we live in this short-sightedness world. We know it's there. It's
Yep.
just terrifying to sometimes really have to think about it. But if you
Right.
don't,
I mean, it's not a fun discussion. Everyone wants to
Right.
talk about the fun part of retirement, right? Vacations,
Yeah.
and I'm going to travel, the hobbies, I'm going to do this and that.
Yep.
But there's other pieces that you have to plan for. You stress test it.
Yeah.
And that's how we look at it is, hey, we plan that nothing's going to happen. You'll live for, through full life expectancies and just pass away in your sleep. That's what everyone wants. But
and it's only going to get worse if you don't. Yeah.
Not going to happen that way for everyone. And the bigger portion of us than we'd like to believe are going to need care later on in life. So what does that look like? How are you going to pay for that?
Yep. You got to have a plan, folks. You got to address some of this stuff, which is what the checklist here is all about. So we've gone through 8. We're down to 9.
Yep.
So you've addressed all the other stuff. Hopefully you've done a good job. You've got all this ready. You're down to 9. And that's, do I have any kind of legacy plan at all? And again, all through this checklist, this piece down here, even though it's 9, it could be affected differently by the other choices that you make, because you may come in as a couple, as a spouse, and say, I want to leave him a ton, and the other person says, I don't want to leave him anything, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, so we have those discussions, and that often comes up. It's like, well, what do you want to leave? Do you want to leave anything? Is it whatever's left? Nothing wrong with that. The majority of our clients, that's their scenario. Look, I'm not planning on leaving anything. The reality is there's probably going to be something there.
Sure.
But I don't want to plan for it. But we've got other clients that say, I'd like to really leave X amount. I want to give them kind of a start at that point of, this is what's there.
And if you've identified that, Phil, if you've identified that, tell your advisor early on so that
absolutely,
so that the other 8 checkpoints can be worked into knowing that you've got a number. Let's say it's 500,000 sitting over here that you want to have earmarked for the kids or grandkids. Make sure that that's been discussed all along.
Right. And that's a scenario of, if you want to leave X amount to the kids, grandkids, whatever that is, again, there's a totally different way to handle that. So let's build it into the plan up front, knowing that that's the case, and let's do it that way, if that's what you want. So again, it's about having the discussions. What do we want this to look like? And even a little bit beyond that is it is going to happen at some point that you're going to pass away. Have plans in place to say, this is what's going to happen when I pass.
Right.
So there's the amount, but then there's also how do you want this to pass?
Right.
And if you just let it happen,
hopefully
it'll happen. Probate's going to come in, and it's going to be a difficult process for the kids, and you don't want to go through that. Have it pre-planned ahead of time to say, this is what we would like to have happen. It's going to go to, these kids, grandkids, whatever it is.
Yeah.
If you want to stretch it out over their life, whatever it is that you want to do, have those discussions early, get plans in place to make that happen.
Yes, if you're still holding a grudge because Brandon dinged your Corvette,
that's right.
You may make it more complicated on him.
Yep. But then with all of this, that's part of the plan. Is maybe you have a certain opinion up front, and that's how you plan it. You can always change it.
That's right.
Down the road. So
yeah. Yep. All right. So we're on number 10. I actually have a couple that I was trying to debate which one I wanted to go with, Phil. I don't know if I should make a dealer's choice and let you tell us, or if I should throw one to you. But I was thinking about it's all been X's and O's. This whole list has all been data and numbers.
Yeah.
I was thinking, let's go with number 10 in checklist for getting ready for retirement. What in the world do you want to do when you're retired? Have you really thought that through? And don't come at me with I'm going to play some golf, I'm going to play some pickleball, and we're going to go see the grandkids. We all want that on our list, right?
Yep.
But that's not Monday through Friday, 12 hours a day or 14 hours a day when you're awake. Like truly, like what do you want to do with your time in retirement? And I think most people don't really drill that down enough. Not to say you've got to make a daily plan and an hourly plan, Phil, but have you just really thought about what you want to do in retirement? Because most people I talk to initially get retired. They're either say, I'm so busy, I can't believe it. Or they're like, oh my God, I'm bored to tears. Right.
Right. Yeah, well, we focus on what are we retiring from, right? The job. That's our big focus always is, okay. And I always tell my clients, look, you'll know when it's time, right? And I can't tell you how many clients we've gone through this with that, I'm not sure if I want to retire yet or whatever. And it's fine.
One more day.
Let's plan for this, whatever the date is. And you'll know, and when we get to that date, if it's not comfortable, keep going. It's about having a plan and then having flexibility in it. But it's not just what am I retiring from? It's what am I going to retire to? you know, and that comes back really to point one, envisioning that retirement.
Yeah.
What does that look like for you? It doesn't, again, to your point, you don't have to have it planned out. Well, I'm going to do this, and this is Monday to Friday, and here's my schedule. We've lived by schedules in the workforce for years.
Right.
You might want a little flexibility, and clients love that in retirement.
Great. You do early on, but I mean, think about the pandemic. How many of us, with the lockdown, after a couple of, maybe 2 or 3 days or a week or 2 weeks, at first it's kind of fun. You're like, sweet.
It's like a big vacation. And
yeah, but then after a bit, you're like, all right, my back hurts, or my knees are killing. I got to get up and do something.
I got to do something. Yeah.
So just, think that through, because I think we put focus on the, it's the retirement commercials. It's right. Mm-hmm. We're going to Disney. We're taking a boat trip.
Yeah. The couple traveling on the, sailing out in the ocean on the ship or whatever. I mean, that's always the pictures we see, which is great. I mean, that's a piece of it.
It's not the reality of
every day of the year. So
it's the reality of saying, hey, you haven't helped me around the house today, or taking the, just washing the car or cutting the grass for the umpteenth time.
Yep. So I mean, that's the big adjustment to a lot of people is, you're used to getting up in the morning, honey, goodbye, going to work, and I'll see you tonight, and you come back at night, and but all of a sudden, boom, 24/7. And COVID brought a lot of that around. What does it look like living together?
It was a nice trial run, if nothing else, because it's
right.
Oh, geez.
I've got one client that brings to mind when we talk about that he does a lot of studio work, kind of like you. He did voiceovers and that when he was in his career for radio, and he still has a few clients he does some of that with.
Right.
So he's got a studio down in the basement, and that's his office. He goes there. She loves to sew, so she's got a sewing room up in the upper level, and the same thing every day. They kind of go to their work, so to speak, right? But I mean, what do you want to do? Figure it out.
My wife
do you want to
be
involved in charity? Do you want to work? That's great. Retirement doesn't mean not working. Retirement means working on your own terms.
Right.
There's a lot of clients that I have that will retire, but then they go back to maybe not the same job, but something different. Maybe it's a passion that they've had, but it's more the social aspect of it. It's not about earning money at that point. It's on your own social interaction, and it's on your own terms.
But it does cost money, right?
But it does, yes.
That's the thing. It's like the old saying. My dad used to love to tell me that in retirement, every day is a Saturday, and I spend the most money on a Saturday.
That's right.
So just be careful. That's all. Again, part of the strategy, right?
Have a plan for it up front.
Well, this is just a checklist, right? So it's just some ideas to get you started. Have those guardrails. I mean, when you're going across the Mackinac Island Bridge, you're happy.
Yeah, you want those guardrails.
You want those rails there, right? So, so there you go. So, get started, have the conversations, run through this checklist a little bit. Take the checklist to your advisor, or talk with your advisor, or just check off the things that are important to you and bring them up with your advisor, whatever that looks like. If you need some help, reach out to Phil as always. He's here to help you. philstaxhacks.com. That's kind of the podcasting website, but you can always, link back around to his main website there as well. And you can reach out to him. You can let him know you need some help. You can call him at 248-888-7530. You can subscribe to us on Apple, Google, Spotify, iHeart, Stitcher, YouTube, all that good stuff. So feel free to find all that at philstaxhacks.com. And Phil, I'll see you next time, buddy. Appreciate you.
All right. Have a good week.
We'll catch you next time on Phil's Tax Hacks and other retirement facts.
Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.